Today I'm interviewing Bryce Goertzen, who's a shamanic apprentice and practitioner who's living right now in Peru. Bryce has been walking with the medicine steadily for 2 years and doing dietas with various plants and learning all these different healing techniques, especially with ayahuasca, huachuma, and some other sacred medicines. And he works at the Ayahuasca Spirit Center. Bryce, welcome to Behind the Grid, and thank you so much for coming on.
Thanks for inviting me, Chris. Happy to be here.
You have one of the most interesting backgrounds or even interesting jobs that I know about. You use all sorts of different plant medicines to heal people and you've done them all yourself because you have to work with them extensively before you can offer them to other people. Can you give everybody who's listening a sense of what these different plant medicines are and what they're used for?
Okay, well, they came from a lot of ancient cultures, most notably ayahuasca. It's been used for thousands of years as a sacrament over here in the Peruvian Amazon, where it seems to be the Amazon basin seems to be where its use originated as a form of treating various illnesses, spiritual, mental, emotional, and physical. So they've used it, as I said, for thousands of years, and its use is continuing even to this day because primarily it seems to really get to the root of certain issues that people are experiencing with regards to depression, anxiety, various psychological disorders, most notably, because although we do have a very in some ways very competent medical care system in the western part of the world, the hospitals in the States and in Canada are sometimes second to none when compared to like here over in the third world. But the rising use of antidepressants, medications that alter the brain chemistry in order to
crisis.
Yeah, to mitigate what down here would be considered spiritual ailments, because depression in the view of the shamanic practice is almost like being disconnected from your spirit. And when that happens, obviously the world seems pointless. You start questioning your own existence. You don't see any point really in living. And so sometimes that inevitably makes you develop like a very nihilistic philosophy without, and your life is feeling bereft of purpose and you see no point in having intimate connections. But by the same token, when you're in touch with your spirit, if you're living in a harmonious fashion with life in its totality, and looking at it as a magical experience, which I personally believe that it is. I believe that we're all connected. We're all expressions of Source, God, Gaia, and essentially we're the universe looking back on itself. Now, somebody else has used that quote, and I'm not sure who, but that's where a lot of my philosophy comes from. Mm-hmm.
So the different plant medicines you work with help people get back in touch with their spirit, with their inner nature. And also, it seems like you're saying they can also have dramatic healing effects on people even beyond that. What are some of the names of the plants that you work with specifically?
Mm-hmm. Well, ayahuasca is the first one, as you had mentioned. We also use huachuma, which is a cactus that grows out of the Andes in Peru, in the mountain regions. I'm sure there are other places where it grows as well, but that seems that that region has a very popular huachuma. What's the word for it? That seems to be like the origin of, in the Andes, huachuma seems to be the primary medicine, whereas in the Amazon basin, that seems to be where the ayahuasca comes from, because both grow in different places. And the one that we've been using most recently is the sapo, which comes from the Bufo alvarius toad, also known as 5-MeO-DMT. And that is a substance that is smoked through a vaporizer or a specific pipe. And it has very beneficial effects for people who are trying to kick things like addictions.
So you have mainly ayahuasca, huachuma, is that how you say it?
Yes.
Huachuma, and then the bufo, the 5-MeO DMT. I remember you mentioned at an earlier point that you were potentially going to work with Datura. Is that something you still ended up working with?
Yes. So in that, there's a lot of plants that we work with in addition to the three that I just mentioned. Something like Datura, over here, it has a different name. It's called Toei in the Shipibo tradition. And the Toei is something that is used in a form of what's called a plant Dieta. And these Dietas are used a lot of the times over here in conjunction with the ayahuasca, so that you can build a stronger relationship with the plant in a spiritual fashion to be able to learn. If you're looking to pursue the art of curanderismo, like I am, you can also get a lot more healing.
Sorry, the art of what?
The art of curanderismo. So that's essentially being a shaman. So that's like the Spanish word for being a healer.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the Toei is just one of a myriad of different plant medicines that you can use to actually expand your skill set by essentially forming a relationship with a plant ally. So while you brought up Datura, Toei, I know that some of the properties with this, when the diet is done correctly, is it will allow you to be more accurate in your spiritual surgery, because the Toei itself provides almost like an X-ray vision when you're doing like spiritual work on people. People's energy profiles will start to glow certain colors, which means that, if you need to suck out some sort of intrusive energy from somebody, it'll show you the entry point of where it is located, and also the entry point where you should enter to extract it. So wow. Now, if some of your listeners on the podcast if I'm throwing out some terminology that doesn't really sound scientific or anything like that, it is, I apologize for it not being as conforming to the Western way in which we express things. But
don't worry. Yeah. I think my listeners are fairly open-minded, my friend.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Can you go, before we get too far, I would like if you could explain for everybody who hasn't had the plant medicine experience that you and I have, maybe what those first three plants are in terms of like what they're used for and who would take them. Who's the ideal candidate to take on that kind of an experience?
Okay. So we'll go ahead and start with the ayahuasca. So this is a brew that is concocted from the ayahuasca vine, which is a vine that grows all over the Amazon basin. And there's another compound that's used in it, DMT, which comes from the chacruna leaf, mostly. That's what they use down here. There are various other plants that contain DMT inside of them, but the DMT is what gives you the visions inside of the ayahuasca space. But unfortunately, if you eat the leaves just by themselves that contain the DMT, you have an enzyme in your stomach called monoamine oxidase, which breaks it down so that the DMT evaporates in your system, and it renders it completely ineffective before it starts mixing with your brain chemistry. So the ayahuasca vine actually has this MAO inhibitor, which inhibits the enzyme, which promotes the DMT to become orally active. And when you are in that space, that is where the magic of ayahuasca and all the stories you've heard start to come to life. And that's where, you can have the feeling of traveling through different dimensions, seeing old childhood memories, and many things that you can't even explain, because the experience is just so profound and beyond words. Yeah. But
who needs that? Who needs that experience?
Well, you could argue that everybody needs this experience, but what it's been used for most successfully is people who have been subdued to like a lot of trauma in their lives. So for example, if they've gotten molested when they were a child, and there's some behaviors such as an inability to form intimate relationships and things of that nature that occur as a result of that abuse that had happened when when the person was younger. The ayahuasca, once you're brought into this space, actually, there's a promotion of neurological rewiring that's going on, because when we talk about ayahuasca, we call it medicine. Obviously, people in the West like to label it as like a drug, and that, from my experience, is definitely not the case, because drugs don't seem to have a consciousness that lives within them. And when you're taking ayahuasca, most people, myself included, believe that she is an intelligent entity who is very eager to teach, to have you learn, to expand yourself, your sense of purpose, and how you comport yourself within the world. And so a lot of people experience communion with God, and like I was talking about earlier, realizing that you are God, and that you're a part of the universe. That sense of belonging is really therapeutic and very beneficial. It gives you a greater sense of what it means to be alive, and the meaning that that you can strive for in your life. And that is where a lot of people experience the most healing, because again, with something like depression, which can stem from trauma, you feel disconnected, and ayahuasca very consistently helps to reconnect. It is definitely not a panacea by any means. Sometimes therapy, sometimes even a conversation, or sometimes even some other therapies can be just as beneficial. But the ayahuasca is definitely a powerful catalyst for healing in any of those four areas. Mm-hmm. Anyway, so we'll move on from that. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So Wachuma is a cactus that grows in the Andes region. It contains the compound mescaline. It is not very similar to the ayahuasca, though there are a lot of centers around here that use it in conjunction with it. It's the experience with it is such that everything looks a little bit more high definition. You seem to really want to bond with nature. I'm not sure. I don't have as much extensive experience with this medicine. I used to use it a lot more when I owned my own center. Here at the Ayahuasca Spirit Center, we don't use it very frequently. But a lot of people find it very beneficial for connecting with the earth, for connecting with themselves. There's a strange energy that comes along with it that's very masculine. So a lot of the times you'll want to move, you'll want to discover the flexibility of your body. You may become vastly more creative. You may become very inspired. Now, keep in mind, these are all qualities that I'm describing from my own personal experience. There are some other people that become very disoriented depending on the dosage that they take. They may feel like they're melting into the earth, or I've heard that, I haven't had that much experience with LSD, but I've heard that it's very similar. So again, the feeling of disconnect is what people seem to use it for. I suppose, all of these medicines have recreational potential, but a lot of the time, depending on who you talk to, if you talk to somebody like myself or anybody else who's involved in any of the centers, we would be a little bit prone to advise it be used in a ceremonial fashion with respect and with an intention behind it. What are you looking to learn and to gain from the experience? And that'll really help direct the effectiveness of the treatment technique. Mm-hmm.
And who's the ideal person to use this plant?
Mm-hmm. See, this is one that seems to benefit everybody, even if you're just looking to experiment, even if you just want to get a taste of what it's like to be in that space. So for myself, I really like using it for creative expansion. Now, I used to be a musician, so I would like to take it and get inspired to write certain musical ideas. There's other, reconnecting with the earth, reconnecting with your body, so that the body, mind, soul kind of becomes more unified, becomes more harmonious and more centered. Mm-hmm. But that experience lasts for about 12 hours. So if it's a strong one, you're going to be in for a bumpy ride.
Nice. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
Some of these experiences can last for a very long time. And I've heard
Mm-hmm.
that there's even a plant called iboga, which can go like 3 days long. So
Mm-hmm.
can you tell
I've
me
definitely heard about Iboga.
yeah, I'm sure you have. Yeah. Iboga is an intense one. The stories are everywhere within the communities that use plant medicines. Can you tell me a bit about the final plant now, which is really not really a plant. It would be actually a toad, right?
Yeah, so the Bufil alvarius toad, or the Sonoran Mexican desert toad, obviously within the name, it comes from the deserts in Mexico. I believe there are some of them that are around the States as well. But these toads produce a venom that comes from their glands that are on their neck. And I have no idea who discovered this. I don't think anybody really does, and how they figured out to squeeze the glands on the neck of the toad to extract the serum or the toxin that comes from them, to place it on glass, wait for it to dry, put it in a pipe, and then smoke it. And this is a medicine that, oh my God, attaching any words to it is just foolhardy and so futile, because I guess the best thing I can do is describe my experience with the toad, because obviously not everybody's going to have the same experience, but at the same time, I don't want to place any expectation on it if anybody's interested in doing it. So the experience when I do it is universally realizing, very similar to the ayahuasca, but it is far stronger and far more profound. It's they call it the medicine of enlightenment because it seems to work on the crown chakra, whereas something like ayahuasca seems to be more, it's the medicine of healing, so it seems to deal more with the heart chakra center. So when you smoke the toad, the whole experience lasts for about an hour, but you may be in the medicine for about 10 to 20 minutes without any sort of communication. So when you start inhaling on the pipe, everything immediately starts vibrating. Your body starts to feel different, but it's very strange because your brain and your consciousness seems to not alter that much. You're just thrust up into this amazing space of, myself and other people included, or other people, myself included, seem to connect with God in a very profound way. When you come out of the experience, and you usually have facilitators there with you so that you can be watched over in a safe manner. And you'll be looking at, when I've come out of the medicine, I'll look at them and I realize that I am them, they are me. We are all part of this thing together. And isn't this just wonderful? And so many of the problems that we have in our lives become so mundane, and so like worrying about money, worrying about what people think of you. Sitting in that space, it just feels like truth is flowing through you. And when truth and abundance is just in your natural state of being, it really makes you look around and be like, oh, I can have this anytime I want. I don't really need the medicine to experience this. And so there's been a couple times where I've wanted to have the experience again, but I've done it a fair number of times where I can actually just kind of go into a meditation zone and experience that right again. So in that way, it is a very good teacher. Also, again, with it seems to encourage the neurological rewiring, like I was talking about with ayahuasca, because of the profundity. Even though the experience is a lot more short-lived, people like to use it a lot for addictions, because when you're addicted to something, you're obviously experiencing pain, whether that pain is from isolation, whether that pain is from another form of trauma. It really seems to align everything so that your being is just completely upright. And I mean, this is a metaphor, but your being is just harmonious, upright, centered, and focused, and you surrender to the profundity of existence itself.
That's so intense, Bryce. I imagine that you've probably done that a whole bunch of times. I've done DMT before, and I've heard that 5-MeO DMT, the Bufo, is so much more intense. So I'd love to hear, if you can try to put into words, what are some of the ways that you could describe? I can't even really put my question into words, but I'm just trying to understand, how would you describe that state or that experience of God?
Just unity, plain and simple. It just feels like you are connected with everything, and that there is no separation. There's no separation between you and the clouds and the plants and other people, the walls, the tables, the chairs, everything. You're a necessary part of this amazing matrix that we inhabit. And it makes you want to be more human. It doesn't make you want to run away. Now, okay, I should take that back. Sometimes I have seen people who want their names to be something that come from extraterrestrials or something like that. So there is the risk of having a profound amount of ego inflation, because again, with the medicine of enlightenment, you feel like this truth is coming through you. And depending on where you are in your spiritual development in the realm of ego, you can think that you know the greatest secret that's never been told, and you have like the status of like Jesus Christ or something of that manner. So now, I've certainly had experiences where I thought I was the second coming of Christ. However, my ego was very much in check, to the point where I would just laugh at myself. Look at you. Oh my God. You think you're the greatest thing since sliced bread. Everybody in the world's going to want to interview you. Everybody wants to know your name, and just sit there and to laugh at yourself. And oh my God, look at this ridiculous identity that thinks it's more important than anything or anybody else. So I do enjoy sometimes when the ego inflation goes on, because it's temporary. And you know, I have a girlfriend currently who's very quick to kind of like shut down the ego in a very, you know, anytime I have any inclination to narcissism, she's the first one to let me know. And
Yeah, mine does the same. Mine does it.
yeah.
Yeah, no, it's such a gift on the spiritual path to have somebody to check you and bring you back and remind you that you're not perfect and you're not human. But then at the same time, when you're feeling low, remind you that you are divine and that you are important and you are valuable. So it is really beautiful to have that check and balance. But what you're saying about enjoying the ego inflation because it's such a comedy show, I've never heard it from that perspective, and I find that really refreshing.
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah. Well, I mean, with all this work, and you know, you have to have a sense of humor with it. If you meet any of the shamans, you'll very rarely find one that's 100% serious all of the time, and that is because, you know, laughter itself is medicine. It's probably the best medicine. That's why people go to stand-up comedy shows. That's why people watch funny movies, because it feels good to laugh and it makes you enjoy being alive. So, you know, if there was anything that could just give you like a profound amount of laughter, well, I suppose marijuana could do that, depending on your temperament with it. But yeah, no, I mean, laughter itself is the best medicine. Like it's probably better than ayahuasca. It's probably better than bufo. It's probably better than wachuma and all these other plants, just because we don't need anything to be able to do it. You know, a lot of the times these plant medicines just kind of show you what you already have the capacity to do. They demonstrate to you potential that you have, and that's one of the reasons that you feel very inspired, and you feel very and you feel all these amazing qualities when you take them. They're just showing you what exists, what's there. They're just limiting the filter through which, you know, you're looking at things through your identity and your worldview. They really expand you into the possibility of all that exists. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, that makes so much sense. And I think one of the things that is really special about the way that you're doing it is that you're always being humble about your experience. And even when you have those giant breakthroughs and you have the messages that the world need to hear, you're always able to bring it back. But I am curious though, Bryce, are there any messages that the world needs to hear that you've gotten from these medicines where like you thought you were Jesus because the message was that good? Is there any of those that you can share with us?
Well, I would just like to point out that I'm not Jesus, just in case you weren't aware. That's the first one. The second one would be, there's a very universal message that seems to come by in all of these ceremonies, and that is just to live with love. Now, what that means can go a whole bunch of different directions, but for the sake of just keeping it not so abstract, it's just, look at other people like they are you, because they are you. So treat you like you would treat you. If you see somebody who's, starving for food and they're coming up and begging to you, it's like, if you look down on that person, you have to pretend that you are in their shoes, because it really makes you it made me very aware that these people who a lot of the times we find annoying, inconvenient, and et cetera, if you grew up with their upbringing, with their societal environment, with their economic status, you would be those people. And so it really increased my compassion quite a bit. It seems to really work on, if there happens to be compassion centers within the brain, it seems to really bring that up. And but here's the thing that I've noticed in working in this field. I'm just gonna have a little bit of coffee here. I do think it is very important to live with love, but that also includes the area of tough love. That means sometimes saying things that people might not necessarily want to hear about certain behaviors that they are doing, because they perhaps are unaware of the consequences that they are reaping on themselves and other people and the environment, et cetera, et cetera. Now, it includes tough love, but there's also this love and light culture which exists inside of the ayahuasca kingdom specifically. Now, I understand the allure, and I understand the wanting to appear like you are an angel sent from the earth, again with the Jesus metaphors. We all have darkness within ourselves. We all have love within ourselves simultaneously. Time and time again, we do have these systems of and patterns of behavior that way back down the phylogenetic chain, we were very tribal creatures and we were very aggressive. And a lot of that, I don't think we've really evolved past. And this whole love and light movement, this, what would you call it? The wanting to appear like you are pure love and pure light and all that. Now, everybody has faults. Everybody has made mistakes. And those things most of the time are very forgivable. But I am not one to paint myself as love and light. I, quite frankly, understand that sometimes I say things that are hurtful. A lot of the time they are unintentional. There's not a whole lot of, like, if you're trying to help somebody who's been deeply traumatized and you tell them to just love all the time, it's like, for some people that works, but for a lot of people who have very serious traumatic issues, you need to be able to distinguish between good and evil. And a lot of the times in a traumatic memory, you're experiencing hell, which can be considered darkness. And in order to move through the darkness, you have to move through it in order to get to the light. And so understanding that light and darkness actually exist in the whole reality of non-duality. Now, the context of duality and non-duality, it totally depends on the conversation and the angle that you're trying to get at. But you can't have darkness without the light, and vice versa.
Yeah, that is such an important message. And that's one of the key messages that I believe in and that I want to share, is exactly that there's a place for everything. And personally, I've noticed that recently, because I tend to have a desire to take down all dogma wherever I see it. I don't like when people have these constructs that they force on other people, and then they make sure that other people follow their rules, and et cetera, et cetera. And then I realize, well, I'm doing the same thing if I force that. Like, if I enforce no dogma on people, then I'm just being dogmatic. And then I was like, well then dogma in my view would be the darkness. And then I would have to accept that and integrate that and just allow people to have different, even very strong opinions on different things. And I need to allow myself to have strong opinions on things. So in that way, I totally understand. But what you're saying about allowing space for darkness, allowing space for trauma, allowing space for pain, all of these things help us create the inverse, and then ultimately the non-dual aspects of our existence.
Exactly. And to deny some of your emotions that probably lie within the category of darkness, like anger, for example, is an extremely useful emotion when you listen to it in the right way. Because, for example, I'm not saying you should be an angry person or anything like that. I'm not trying to condone angry, rageful behavior, but, there are there are benefits to getting angry sometimes. What anger is trying to show you is what it is that you actually desire and what you actually want. For example, if somebody cuts you off in traffic and you have a very quick kind of like, fuck you kind of like reaction, most of the time, by the time you get to the destination that you're headed, you've completely forgotten about it. And it's very important to keep your, reactionary systems intact, especially when you're driving, because what you're driving is actually a weapon. So you want to be, as sharp as you can be. So, however, it's anger is kind of like a fire. If when fires come through forests, for example, like over here in the Amazon, the ones that are very effective, they burn up all the dead vegetation so that new life can grow into the soil, so that new plants can continue to thrive and survive and provide habitats for other animals and stuff. But if there's a bunch of dead brush is not really going to help anybody out. But when the fires start to spread, if you're getting angry for a little bit too long and you're holding on to this very visceral emotion, it actually starts to eat away at your biology. It can actually lead to cancers, ulcers, various physical ailments, psychological disturbances and stuff. And those things aren't good. But the good part about it is that it can show you what you're actually desiring. So it's the same with depression. It's the same with to deny any sort of emotion, whether it be positive or negative, is to actually deny your humanity, because we are spiritual beings, we are emotional beings, and we are physical beings at the same time.
Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up anger, because recently on my Instagram page, I put out a video about anger and about the way that I've been learning to deal with it. And I gave that exact same example about somebody cutting you off in traffic. It's probably just the universal anger example.
Mm-hmm.
But my insight to it was that if you can shift your goal, if you can shift your focus, you can stop being angry, because anger is generally created or triggered when you perceive something as blocking you from your destination, blocking you from your goal, whether that is somebody cutting you off from your exit, or whether it's your partner coming and asking you if you can clean the house because you said you were going to, but you just got back from work and you're super tired. And so now the request is coming between you and your relaxation. So you can generally find that that's where anger is triggered. And I figure if you can change your focus from the immediate goal, like, hey, I want to relax, to a more long-term sustainable goal, like, I would like to grow my relationship with my partner, I'd like to have order in my house, or I'd like to manifest whatever my vision is right now, then you can avoid some of that short-term pitfalls.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I'm 100% on boat with that, man.
Bryce, can we go through your history? Because you have such an exciting story. You used to be a musician back in Canada, and then you went to start your own center and to learn from ayahuasca shamans and Shipibo shamans. And then at some point you created your own center, and then now you're working at a specific, was it the Spirit Healing Center?
Yes.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of a dark side to what I'll be explaining. So no
dark side here. You have to be love and light, Bryce.
Yeah. Oh, I know. Oh, might as well just turn the podcast off now.
We're done.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, like my background essentially was I was a musician back in Canada who I worked as a welder just to be able to supplement some income while I played shows live over in Canada and stuff like that. It was amazing. I have the most recent project that I had was a band called Gecko, The album is called Beautiful Violence. That's on iTunes and Spotify and yada, yada, yada. Funny enough,
What kind of
that
music is
album,
it?
oh, it's metal, but it has elements of finger style. There's folk. There's obviously, like, anytime you have metal inside of any song, it has to be considered a metal song. So even if it's metal for just a little bit, you just have to brand it metal. So, but there's rock elements. There's some other ones that are very heavy and very, fast paced, lots of double bass, which is always fun for me to do. But there's a lot of experimental kind of like fingerstyle techniques. A lot of there's one song that I've tried doing like flamenco guitar in the middle of it. So it's very colorful and eclectic.
So you're the guitarist?
Yes, and the vocalist.
Oh, nice. Are you the lead singer?
Yeah.
So it's your band.
Mm-hmm.
You're like the leader in it, I'm imagining. Although obviously it's a collective effort. Like, I wouldn't deny that either.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, the other guys really helped the live show kind of come to life. Now, we never really got the time to be able to develop it to the point where we really wanted, because obviously I had to move here and it was my project and I had to start dedicating my time to this work, just because I felt it was a little bit more important. But yeah, anyway, so once I had tried ayahuasca for the first time, it had actually expanded my creativity and my sense of self-worth and my self-confidence as well, because prior to doing ayahuasca for the first time, I was really unconscious about like a lot of these insecurities that I had within the perception of others. And I really cared deeply about what other people thought. And there's obviously utility in that, because when you have a good reputation, you're going to just do better in the world. But mine was a little bit to a default where I was like a people pleaser. And because of that, I was actually ignoring a lot of my own interests to go out of my way for other people. What the medicine showed me was that I was just as important as other people. And so with the first 2-week session with ayahuasca, it really allowed me to pursue my own project. Because a lot of the times I was just kind of joining bands because I just wanted to be in a band, even though I was constantly creating my own music, and which other people were telling me was fantastic and should be a project on its own. And it was my drummer initially who inspired me, or he really just kind of annoyed me until we made a live band together, because I had already recorded the album. I went into the studio with a guy who he produced one of the last 3 Days Grace albums, and I had my brother playing drums. And I was just going to make the album, do like a music video, and okay, that was a fun little project. But then when I was jamming with one of my friends, he just kept bugging me he's like, dude, we have to make this a thing. We have to make this a thing. And I was like, okay, fine. And then next thing you know, a couple months later, we're playing for one of the biggest instrumental metal bands on the face of the planet. And it was just like dream come true within a couple months of just making that happen. So, but like I said, it was a very short-lived project. Usually you have to be in the scene and stuff like that for to get that kind of notoriety right off the bat. But a lot of it was luck, I'll be honest. It's just about some of the people that I've known from being in the scene for that long. But anyway, so yeah, and I was working as a welder to supplement the income for that.
Bryce, it sounds to me like you were able to have closure on this big project of yours. Like, music had been a passion for so long that the universe was able to wrap it up really quickly and give you like that peak experience that you're always looking for, that you always would have wondered if you could get, so that you could move on and put that to rest for a time being, at least, so that you could do this healing work.
And that's exactly that's 100% what it feels like it did. Because for a long time when I was doing it, I just felt like I wasn't getting the respect I deserve. I need so much respect in this damn music business. But it was almost once I stopped caring about what other people thought, that's when all the success started happening. So it was almost like a lesson in itself to have that experience. So I'm very grateful for it. And obviously, just supplementing the income with a 9-to-5 boring welding job where I was surrounded by blue collar people, where saying fuck you was the equivalent of good morning, which it was a good job. I was able to pay for lots of musical equipment, my tickets to Peru and stuff like that. But then the second time I came down, I went down to Cusco, and then I ended up meeting the guy who was actually going to be my first teacher to start an apprenticeship, and I was going to start an apprenticeship with him. So I spent a month over in Cusco with this guy doing some diets with the plants, and then he invited me to come down to his center in July. So we had a little bit of a break. I was able to make back some money, and that's when I was playing concerts and stuff like that as well, just kind of living life over in the Western world, feeling pretty good, especially now that I had this apprenticeship to look forward to, because I had realized that what I was actually doing the music initially for was to bring about healing in people's lives. And but there was just something about the way that it was being expressed that wasn't entirely authentic in terms of wanting the healing to come from it, which is fine, because I love music and I love talent, and just like anybody. But there's a performance aspect to it, which is kind of like a look at me, aren't I awesome? Look at me up on stage. But the icaros that are sung within the course of the ceremonies are ones that are not really performance pieces. They're more like prayers. And so when you're singing, it's what you're trying to do is stimulate something deep within their biology to change something within, so that they can either find their path, so they can move through painful memories, so they can experience physical healing, and yada, yada, yada. Anyway, so I meet this guy. I'm going to not say his name because we are no longer working together, and I will tell you why. So I went down to his center, but it wasn't really much of a center. It was a project that he was starting. And he asked if I wanted to go in on it with him, to which I replied, absolutely. And so from there, we started a business, which was an ayahuasca spirit healing center. So at first it was going very well. I was apprenticing with this guy. I was dieting various plants. I was under his tutelage. He was giving me a lot of advice. And, things looked like they were going pretty well. We were having steady traffic. We were helping people with various things. There was like a profound sense of purpose that I was experiencing and meaning from helping people with the various things that were going on in their lives. But then there started some darker aspects of my master's behavior started to become very apparent. And over the course of time, it was demonstrated that he was lying. He was stealing money from me. He was creating a lot of conflict within the village where our center was situated. And then there was a point where the final nail in the coffin was when there was some physical violence within his family, which he himself perpetuated. And this is somebody who works with ayahuasca to bring about spiritual healing. So once I had seen a lot of these things, it was something that I didn't want to believe, because I had so much faith in this guy, and he talked like he was this amazing creature. Again, this is why I do not like the love and light philosophy, because talk is cheap. You can say you're full of love and light and all, and sugar and spice and everything nice, but what really shows your wisdom is the actions that you take in the world. And so if you cheat, if you steal, if you beat up your wife, those things make your dishonesty so transparent. And for anybody who has faith in you, that faith will be lost, which is unfortunate. Anyway, so when we had seen all these things acclimating, my girlfriend and I were working at the center, and we just had a hunch that it was going to get worse from here, because this was something that was very accumulatory. And from there, I went and contacted the first shaman that I ever had any experience with, this guy named Wheeler Noriega Rodriguez. So I've known him for 4 years. Since I had talked to him, he had opened his own center very close to where we were situated. So I contacted him. I let him know the situation and everything like that. he said, well, I mean, if you want to, you can come over here. He's like, I'm looking for a new translator, and we can always use a few more facilitators and things like that. So what we have going right now is like a service exchange. I work for him. I get to pursue my apprenticeship. I get to continue to, advance in the realm of trying to become a curandero so that I can do what he does. And in exchange, I am his translator. I facilitate for the ceremonies. I do things like plant walks, and I fill people in on the ayahuasca culture and just what it's like in the world of the Shipibo people, which is the tribal people which I'm living with currently. Mm-hmm.
Wow, that is such an intense story, Bryce. So, and then the place you're at now is that place?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. And how long have you been at the new place now?
That will be since November.
Since November, and that's that's the Spirit Healing Center.
Yeah, the Ayahuasca Spirit Center.
Ayahuasca Spirit Center. The Ayahuasca Spirit Center. Wow. So, were you able to take anything from your previous experience, despite the pain of it, and bring it over into the new one?
Mm-hmm. Well, if you're talking about material goods, I wasn't able to bring a whole lot out.
No, skills.
Oh yeah, skills, obviously. Yes. See, the thing that is most disappointing about that whole part of my life in doing this work is that although my first master was, to put it mildly, a pretty reprehensible human being, what made it hard to leave was that he was a magnificent teacher. He was very good at being able to show me how to use the plants, how to channel the plants, how to sing the Ika Rose, and just basically how to get started in this work. And in that way, I'm actually grateful to him. Now, whether or not the behavior will change in the future is not up to me. So I wish him the best. I hope he fixes his behavior, and I wish him nothing but love, honestly.
Wow. That's really beautiful, Bryce, that you've come to such a place of forgiveness and wishing him so much healing, because I know that that's one of those experiences that is so painful for you in your life. And the way I'm seeing it in your story is that almost was an initiation period for you to see if you are the sort of person who is honest enough and who has the integrity enough and the strength enough to make the hard choices when they come up. And it seems like you've passed the test. And so I can only imagine that there's going to be an abundance of opportunity for you coming in the near future and probably in the present too.
Yeah. All I can say to that is maybe, but it comes back to that thing that I was talking about earlier about I see myself in you. So even though I was suffering abuse at the hands of this man, I still can see, like, I didn't grow up in the jungle. I didn't grow up in a state of poverty where as a young child, I wasn't able to eat for a week. I wasn't restricted to eating ketchup and mayonnaise just because I was hungry. I wasn't born in the jungle. Where I was born, I had a lot of opportunity and a lot of privilege, and I have a very supportive family network and that kind of thing, and relatively wealthy compared to the people who are in the jungle. So I really don't understand what it is like to be in his shoes. And like I said, if I happen to be born into his circumstance, I would probably do the exact same thing because I'm no better.
Yeah, and those are very wise words, Bryce. I've heard a quote from a Christian philosopher that said, "But by the grace of God, there go I." And it's just this idea that anyone, like, we could have been anyone, and it's only because of you could say by God's grace or by the divine luck of the universe that we are in the wealthy experience that we are in right now. And so it's so special that you can see that. And I think that there's another layer to it of being able to see that part of yourself reflected in your external reality. So seeing the part of myself that is abusive, or seeing the part of myself that is deceptive and dishonest, and to forgive the other person externally, knowing that I'm forgiving myself for the very same thing, just in a different measure and maybe in a different light, in a different, the difference is just in the specifics of it.
Mm-hmm. No, and that's very well worded. And the other thing too, with what I was saying about anger and like all those other kind of negative emotions, they do have utility, but forgiveness is absolutely crucial to moving on with your life, to healing, to really seeing the beauty in the world around us and being grateful for it. The forgiveness actually allows you to, like, sometimes you need to feel your feelings, but you also need to forgive others who have wronged you. And a lot of the times, what I've noticed is in the space of the ceremonies is that where people get the most healings is where they forgive themselves, because a lot of the times we burden ourselves with not being perfect. And what gave you that idea that you were ever perfect? We all have flaws. We are a very adolescent species. We are, you know, according to the scientific theories, like, we are evolved from primates. And so we're not doing too bad, especially for people who have woken up to you know, for instance, like with the climate change thing, everybody thinks that people are like a scourge on the earth, depending on who you talk to about the subject. But that's only one aspect of our humanity. You know, when you see like a lot of communities, when you see a lot of people, you know, trying to clean up the oceans, and, you know, we exist in all of these different categories: good, bad, evil, righteous, blubbity, blubbity, blah. We're creatures with, because the language that we use is specific to humans. So we are black, we are white, we are yellow, we are blah, 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 blah. We are good, we are evil, we are, you know, all of that stuff. But what we ultimately are is like, we are just being.
Yeah. Yeah, that's so well said. There's so many different labels you could put on yourself, but all of those labels are superficial and they don't actually describe the reality of the experience, the reality of the existence. And the whole idea of labeling things good and bad is just meant as a guideline. It's just meant as a general way of finding out what to do when you're disconnected from yourself. But ultimately,
Mm-hmm.
when you're connected to yourself, you know the truth of what you're meant to do in any given moment. And you can function from that space of connection. And that space doesn't really have labels. It doesn't really have white, black, yellow, or good, bad, or conservative, or Christian, or Buddhist, or shaman, or any label you can possibly think. None of that exists when you're functioning from that space of complete unity.
Exactly. And that is why, yeah, a lot of these substances like the ayahuasca and the toad, they bring you into states that they're completely beyond words, because anything that you try to describe is to describe the experience, is to bastardize it, is to like taint it. There's a lot of people in this work too that seem to be pursuing enlightenment as if, you know, that enlightenment is the goal. And, you know, to experience, I'm definitely not enlightened by any stretch of the imagination. But when you feel this sense of truth that you connect with, and that like time stands still, and again, the experience is indescribable, but like trying to speak it seems like, you know, when I experience it now, I just don't say anything, because it's almost like now it's coming through a filter. It's coming through a filter where it has a face, it has an identity, it has a name, it has, you know, pants that I'm wearing, and like all of a sudden now it's contaminated, and all of a sudden it's not the truth. Now it's just my perspective. So in experiencing truth in its most, you know, in its absolute magnificent profundity, it's like when that happens, shh. Yeah.
Yeah,
That's just my own take on it. But
that symbol you did of putting your hand over your lips is a very ancient and esoteric symbol, and I think that is the exact meaning of it in its most connected state. There's bastardizations of that symbol too, but in its most connected state, when you put your finger over your lips, that is the greatest truth.
Yeah. And I'm actually thinking about it now. When you do this, you're splitting your mouth into two. It's like masculine, feminine, dual, non-dual, and every sense of opposites that you can be doing. But at the same time, your mouth is one connected thing. So it's almost like the yin yang symbol, where the yin yang is one thing, but it has the two. Yeah, I'm having all kind. Okay, that's more truth that I'm just talking. That I'm gonna right now. Yeah.
No, but there's something beautiful in bastardizing it too. Like there's something beautiful in art where you're expressing these divine concepts in these like fucking ridiculous ways, and it's monkeys trying to express divinity, and it's hilarious and and meaningful,
and it's wonderful
and wonderful.
Yeah. Could you imagine life without art? Like the other day, I farted in front of my girlfriend, and
Nice.
She went, "Ew, what is wrong with you?" And I just looked at her. I'm like, "I'm putting the art into fart." You can turn anything into it. Uh-huh.
Yeah, I mean that's well done, because you have to remember how gross you are, and when gross you are and how dirty you are and how material and hairy and sweaty and whatever the concepts are that repel you, you can learn to embrace that part of you and see the divinity even in that. They have this idea in Sanskrit. I was reading a book called Agora, the Left Hand of God. It's a phenomenal book. I recommend it to everyone. But they talk about this concept called a klesha. A klesha is like they call it a mental disease or contamination of the mind, where you start repelling something and you avert it very strongly. And it could be anything from dead bodies to nails on a chalkboard, or somebody cutting you off, or maybe the way something smells, or hair, or something about your body. Whenever you have these kleshas, they actively go and destroy them. So by destroying it, they just take part in it. So if they have a klesha against meat, they'll go eat meat. If like they'll do rituals on dead bodies, and it sounds intense, but when you can understand their thinking and the heart behind it, of wanting to break down the contaminations of the mind, the limiting constructs and ideas that create these polarities in our experience, then you can see that there's something sacred even to your fart, Bryce.
Yeah, no, exactly. I can totally relate to what you're saying too. And what that Sanskrit teaching seems to also refer to is breaking taboo, realizing that we have a weird, like we both come from Canada, and I think we all know about the Jordan Peterson situation with Bill C-16 and the limits on free speech that we are being pushed to receive in that part of the world. And that seems very, like, when you start taking away words that people can say, you start limiting the way that people can think, which means less ingenuity, which means less fun, which means less everything, right? Because we live in a world of words, and one of the reasons that the Western world is so amazing is that we have freedom of speech. Now, there was another point that I was going to make, and for some reason my brain is just trailing off into sometimes I think I think it's called divergent thinking. You think of like 5 things all at once, and I'm trying to keep on one track. But here's what I was going to say. When you start doing this work, you learn every second of every day from any situation, whether you're by yourself, whether you're with other people. And the welding job that I was talking about earlier, before I started coming down here to do the work more full time, there was a lot that I was learning there within the realm of offense being taken. Because most of the time we say you take offense. A lot of the times offense isn't given. Sometimes it is, but the manner in which you choose to receive it is up to you, right? So what I was saying about the welding job was that a lot of the times people just say the most horrendous shit that you could ever hope to come across, like words like faggot, nigger, cunt, fat, just anything that has any sort of offensive connotation. what working at that job really taught me was that they're just words. You can see them as threatening. You can see them as good. You can see them as like they're just mouth noises. And so if somebody's having like a very strong and visceral reaction to something that's coming out of your face, and it's just a word. Like if I just said fuck right now, I'm not gonna, like, obviously I'm talking to you and I know you understand the
I'm so
context of it,
offended,
but
Bryce.
I know you are. I know you are. But that's one of the things that I try to bring into the ayahuasca world as well, is just to not take everything so seriously. You know, that's one of the reasons that comedians seem to be the only ones who really speak the truth, is because they go up there and say anything, and now they're under fire, which is absolutely insane. Now, again, I don't know where I was really going with this point, but I think it was just to hammer home that words have only as much power as you'll allow them to have an impact on your life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And there's so much that you're saying there, and there's so much truth. There's also, I just love playing devil's advocate on everything because it's so much fun.
Mm-hmm.
And because I find that by finding both sides to every story, you're able to find deeper layers of truth. So one of the, of course, truth. Anyway, we already talked about truth. Anyways, so what I want to say is it totally about. I love what you're saying about it's your responsibility to not take offense. Like it's your responsibility to manage the 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 situations that are coming at you, but at the same time you also don't want to give offense. And well, maybe you do, but usually it's something that you would do very tactfully. If you're going to say something offensive, you want to do it in a way where you ultimately have somebody's best interest in mind. Like maybe you are
Mm-hmm.
trying to trigger them so that they'll see themselves, instead of just triggering them just to like piss them off. You know what I mean? And it's
Mm-hmm.
challenging to find that balance of when it's okay to trigger somebody and when it's not to. And we're all allowed to make mistakes, and that's the fun of life. So it's not so serious. And
Yeah.
then with the Jordan Peterson situation, what I find really interesting about that is I'm totally a big fan of free speech, but ultimately I don't give a fuck what the government says. I have free speech anyways because I exist and I can talk.
Mm-hmm.
So I will use it no matter what. So that's the way I function. And then at the same time, you have this other balance of sometimes people want to protect themselves, and they want to create this idea of a safe space. They want to create some sort of protection around them because they need help. And even if it may not be the best idea to go to the government for that help, like it's worth listening to even the people who want to create these anti-free speech bills. It's worth listening to the pain behind their stories, the pain that's
Mm-hmm.
creating these tyrannical expressions.
Mm-hmm. No, I'm in full agreement with that, man. The again, with the trying to understand where the person comes from. We don't know, when you see somebody who's protesting Jordan Peterson because he's talking at an event or something like that, the first reaction, and I usually have this reaction too, is, man, those people are fucking stupid. Don't you have anything better to do with your life? Like, what are you doing? But with the help of the ayahuasca, I kind of look at them and I'm like, there is probably something going on inside of their life that they're extremely unhappy with, that is making them, in Freudian psychology, if you repress something, it comes back with a vengeance and expresses itself either through a different avenue or through avenues of the unconscious. Being passive aggressive is one of those examples. So when people are doing that, I look at them and I'm like, there's definitely an element of this that I don't understand, because, as I said, like, looking at other people now, I realize that I am them too. So when I look at that and I'm having that reaction, I always kind of catch myself and I'm like, again, I would be in that exact same situation if I was born to their family, in their economic status and all of that stuff. So, um, I'm constantly fluctuating between, if you want to label it, it's like being human and being spiritual shaman, blah blah blah, you know. So, and part of, like, my ego wants me to stay in that very judgmental phase of existence, because I'll be honest, it is fun. A lot of the funnest times that I've had, especially with my friends, is when I was drunk and we were all talking shit about whoever, you know, Stacy over at the bar, she got fat tits and whatever, like, you know, just dumb shit like that. But where you get a lot more life satisfaction, I've found, is being able to look at things for like how they actually are, rather than what your ego wants them to look like. But the problem with that is like life starts becoming a little bit more boring.
I don't know about that. I find life super trippy when I stop functioning from the ego perspective. But I totally understand what you're saying about how it's easy to enjoy the destructive experiences of the ego, where you're like talking shit about people, and like you know you shouldn't to some extent, but then your ego is just being a dick and expressing itself. And yeah, I mean, like I totally understand the joys within that. And when it comes to the protesting, it's so tricky for me, because I love protecting my rights from the rights that I believe that I have, and the ones that I believe that I'm owed. But it's really interesting, because if you really think about the most natural possible thing is if there's no government involved whatsoever, and it's just the people. I mean, and I mean, there's logical flaws here too, but let's just play it out. So the most natural possible thing, where there's no government involved and it's just people talking it out, or whatever. If you say something to really piss somebody off, like if it wasn't for the government, like they might come in and like just kill you if they have more power over you. You know, it's possible for them to do that. So it's really interesting, because like, is there really freedom of speech? Because then you have to ask, is freedom of speech like freedom of speech could be like, I have the right to say anything I want, but then there isn't the right that there's no consequence to that. Like, people are allowed to have whatever consequence they want from that, like equal and opposite reaction. And if I'm not being tactful in my words, then you could say it's their right to respond however they like.
Yeah.
But you know what I mean? Like, I still lean towards free speech by far, because I think it's a much healthier way of existing. But just to play the devil's advocate, it's nice to appreciate that even the idea of free speech is not necessarily natural.
Yeah. And one way to also look at it is, you know, most of the people who are at those protests are very young. They're probably, you know, they're probably in their early 20s, maybe in their 30s as well. The identity is still quite malleable when you're in your early 20s. And so, like, there's a phase in psychology called the messianic stage, which I think comes from Jungian analysis or Jungian psychology. And that's a phase that you don't really want to impede or get in the way of, because, you know, there's strong associations with it for, you know, wanting to bring about change in the world. And it's a very necessary part of human development. And so one of the ways that I've actually looked at them with a little bit more compassion is being like, I used to think like that. And I used to be in that position at that age, in that point in my life. So it's almost like you're watching them do it, and it's like they're gonna move on eventually. And I think most of them probably do. But that's one way to kind of look at it. Now, I'm only 29, and so I definitely don't have anything figured out for the life of me. I know that life's going to throw me curveballs. I know I'm going to experience trials and errors and darknesses in, you know, in closed caption or closed captions, or air quotes. Sorry, that wasn't even the right word. But yeah, there's going to be peaks and valleys. You're going to have amazing experiences in life. There's going to be parts where, you know, your parents are dying and, oh my God, life is going to be totally horrible. So when you kind of like let go to the attachment of existence, and you just kind of like let life flow to you, and you really just give in, you just surrender, you go, I just give up. I'm totally gonna I'm gonna let whatever happens. It doesn't mean you don't stop trying. It doesn't mean you don't. It doesn't mean you stop having goals or anything to try to achieve in your life, because one of the philosophies of mine is that like you have more talent than you'll ever be able to use in this lifetime, and like your duty to God, if you will, or source or the universe, is to try and develop as much of that as you can before you die. But obviously not everybody's going to share that philosophy, but it really helps. One of the central themes of experience within using the ayahuasca, the San Pedro, and the 5-MeO DMT is experiencing death. When you experience death, it feels like when you come back and you start looking at your hands and feeling your body and seeing your mind, you're like, oh my God, I just died. So now everything after, now everything that comes after that is just like bonus rounds. I get like extra lives in a video game. So it's like, why don't I actually pursue what I actually want to enjoy? Why don't I pursue my life's purpose? One of the other things that the medicines help to realize is what you want to do with your life that gives you purpose, that gives you meaning, that gives you fulfillment. And it gives you the courage a lot of the time to be able to, walk towards that, to pursue that. And that's ultimately where a lot of people find the healing. And I mean, you don't need the substances to be able to do that. They're just a gateway. They're just a catalyst. But you can get there with meditation. You can get there with anything. I even think that, you don't even have to be sitting upright with your eyes closed to be meditating. I think you can be meditating all the time, when you're walking, when you're running, even if you're doing athletic activities. We're just always in the moment. There's no, obviously we have Monday, Friday, Tuesday, Wednesday, but there's no time, man. It just doesn't exist where you're right here, right now. And all the events of the past. I mean, I just had somebody, I just met up with a friend yesterday whose memory is a little bit distorted about an event that had happened in the past, but it doesn't matter because we're just right here, right now. The memory that he had kind of put me in a bad light, but it's like, again, with like working with the medicines, you just don't care what other people think. You just completely surrender to the moment, and you're like, well, somebody doesn't think the same way I do, but it's okay, because we're here right now enjoying each other's company. Why don't we just exist in this little bubble of love? I know I'm kind of going all over the place again with the divergent thinking, but
I just call it connected thinking, man.
Yeah,
it's so connected that your thinking is got so many dimensions to it that doesn't even fit into linear words.
Mm-hmm. No, exactly.
Frame it positively.
Yeah.
No, I mean, what you're saying is so true, man. But it's hilarious because I was just on another podcast this morning, and everything that you're saying right there is like a repeat of what this other guy was saying to me on his podcast. It was so funny. It was, oh man, like some of the exact same sentences and everything. It was really interesting to experience. I'm like, clearly the universe is really wanting me to remember this.
Yeah. It might just be reflections being like, hey, Chris, have a look at this. This is important. But I think you're already there, man. Like a lot of, I mean, we've known each other for a few years now, and every time we've gotten together, man, there's so much to talk about. But a lot of the central points that we always focus on is, we at the end of every one of our interactions, it's always, I love you. And
yeah,
so that's
Bryce,
always
I haven't told you, but I am the second coming.
Oh, you are? Awesome.
It's me.
Oh. Cool. I'm gonna start bowing right now. I don't know if that's another thing that it happens so often, especially with ayahuasca, man. There was just a few months ago, we had somebody who literally thought that he was the second coming of Christ.
Oh my God.
And but the thing is, like, I've never experienced, I've never thought that I was the second coming of Christ or anything like that.
You thought it was Krishna. You were Krishna, right?
Yeah, or put whatever label. I just think I just think I'm so important, and I'm just like, I got all these teachings that I gotta let the world know and all this stuff. And sometimes when I see other people experience it, it's like, it's funny when they're also on that level of, oh, look at me, look at how important I think I am. And it's like, you are important, but you know, you're the same as everybody else. You know what I'm saying? And this is one of the other risks that comes with the ayahuasca and 5-MeO DMT and stuff. It's like, you can experience ego death, or you can experience profound ego inflation. So when it comes to really thinking that you're Jesus, there's nowhere to go beyond that in the form of a human. You know what I mean? Because you're basically extending yourself to the status of a deity. But now I'm thinking about the story that I want to tell, but I should probably, in the interest of not, again, I don't want to ruin anybody's reputation. I wouldn't use any names or anything like that, but some of the experiences are quite funny in my opinion. But again, being able to relate to like where it is, it's like, oh yeah, I was there, of course. But the way in which they handle it can change.
Bryce, I want to go back to some of the plant medicines, because you have this wealth of experience that I don't think most of us will ever get a chance to have in our lives, not to the same depth and repetition of these experiences that you've had. So I would love to find out, personally, I'm interested in Datura, and I know you said another name for it. I can't recall it right now, but can you tell me, you know what I'm going to do? I want to share the little bit I know about Datura, and then I want you to show me where I'm wrong and fill me in on the full experience. Mm-hmm. Right? So my friend told me that he did Datura, and again, I will not give names. My friend did Datura at his apartment, and he did it with his friend, and they were just playing Game Boy and stuff. He was just playing Game Boy, especially while waiting for it to kick in. And then after about an hour, he was just thinking, man, when's this thing going to kick in? And then he realized that he did it alone and that his friend wasn't there. And he's like, oh, I guess it is kicked in. So then he went back to playing his Game Boy, and after a bit, he was like, wait a second, I don't have a Game Boy. And he'd been playing this Game Boy for hours that just didn't even exist. So I think, and then apparently he ended the trip by chasing a monkey in the street and then eating a bunch of poppies from his neighbor's yard, which started a whole new trip. But the interesting thing that to me about this plant is that it seems so real. It creates these hallucinations that have this believability to them that goes far beyond what a normal psychedelic would appear to have. And I also heard that there are like kind of like, I don't know how to describe them, like sages in the Himalayan mountains that are a little bit mischievous, that will actually give Datura to people who come up to them sometimes as a way to mess with them. So this is what I know. So fill me in, Bryce. Teach me the truth about Datura.
Okay. Well, I mean, I don't want to sound like I'm an expert in it or anything like that.
You are more of an expert than any of us.
Yeah. Well, from what I understand, so the difference between Datura and Toei, there's a few different types of Datura and Toei. And it's dependent on the color of the leaves. Some of the compound, some of the alkaloids within those plants can vary. The way you can tell if it's Datura is if the flowers come up, if they grow upwards. That is Datura. Toei specifically has like trumpet horns, like angels' trumpets that come down. They're usually white. The ones that you dye, if you're learning the medicine within the realm of curanderismo, and you want to learn the lighter side of Toei, you'll diet the white ones. The other ones, Toei, no, obviously it's a delirium. Like the story that you were describing, that is a very common experience that people have had. Now, I have not actually done it yet, so I don't have any experience to relate it to, but there's a lot of reports of people like getting naked and like locking themselves out of their rooms and doing things within, the reality that everybody else seems to be existing, and that seems strange and almost kind of psychotic in nature. You're right, a vast amount of confusion. And one of the reasons is that it contains an alkaloid called scopolamine, which, if you've seen the Vice documentary called The Most Dangerous Drug in the World, it's the Colombian devil's breath that people will blow at like other people in nightclubs, for example, or put it in their drink so that they're totally susceptible to suggestion. And then people will get taken to ATMs and they'll ask them to take money out of the machines and just give it to them, and they can't do anything about it because the scopolamine alkaloid just seems to be overpowering to the point where you're almost like a zombie. Now, the way that I'm going to be doing it is in the form of a dieta. So when you're training in the ayahuasca tradition, at least in the Shipibo tradition, one of the things they do to gain a little bit more expertise and a little bit more credentials within their profession is to build alliances with plant spirits. And the number one way to do that currently is through the system of Dieta. So this is a method by which you're taking like a concoction of the plant. So for example, the Toei, and you might be drinking it consistently for however long the Dieta is going to take place. Typically, like the average length of a Dieta for somebody who's learning curanderismo lasts about 3 months. And during this 3-month period, now with the Toei, I've already talked to my the guy I'm training under for it, and I'm gonna have to do 6 months with it because of the potency of the plant. So during this process, you're gonna be having no salt, no sugar, no oil, no vegetables, no fruit to eat. You also can't cut your hair. You cannot shave. You have to let your fingernails grow. You have to be like one dirty fucking bastard who's malnourished and skinny and all of this stuff. And usually you have to do it in isolation because the plants seem, when you're learning from a plant, you want to be able to connect to it. And one of the most effective ways to do that is to listen to its spirit. Now, one of the things that I like to tell a lot of the guests who are new at the Ayahuasca Spirit Center is I explain the modalities in which the plants communicate. So, you know, we are multidimensional beings, and I can point out about 4 that we are in currently, like in this moment. So the first one would be your first person perspective. This is, you know, what you see with your eyes. This is the thoughts that you're feeling, your emotions currently, whether you're engaged in the conversation, whether you're not. The second would be the material world. So I'm just touching the walls and stuff around here. So this is where space appears to have a material form, even though, you know, with certain scientific understandings, we know that most of the world is empty space, but it has the visual appearance of, you know, there's the animals, there's the water bottle, there's Chris's head, whatever. And then the third one is the social world, which is actually the primary target of our perception, because we're always thinking about how do I stand in relationship to, you know, my relationship with my spouse, my coworkers, the people at school, the people at work, yada, yada, yada. And we're always looking at how we can advance our status within that realm. And the fourth one, which people might be a little bit more prone to having a problem with, is the spiritual world. And so the plants seem to communicate a lot more through the spirit world. And the way that you catalyze that communication is cutting out one of the 4 dimensions that seem to, you know, it's kind of like when people go blind and then their hearing gets better, right? So by cutting out the social part of it, when you go into isolation, that allows the first person perspective, the material world, as well as and you know, especially the spiritual world, they all seem to inflate a little bit, so that when the plants are actively trying to communicate, that is the realm in which they will pass the messages on to you. And one of the, you know, since we're talking about Toei, it seems like one of the properties seems to be, there's a few. I'm not sure of the medicinal uses. I know it's primarily used for the curanderismo. Like I said, I think at the earlier stages of the interview, it's used to be able to do like x-ray scans on the body so that people can do like extractions of energies, and being able to see the entry points and where the intrusion is located. I've actually witnessed the spirit of Toei used in ceremony before, which was absolutely profound, and that is one of the reasons that I think I want to pursue it, and my master seems to think that I'm ready. But one of the other things it's used for is to connect deeper with your dreams, to make to make a little bit more stronger connection with the world of the invisible, the parts that you don't seem to be aware of all the time, which is probably a reason for the appearance of delirium, which people seem to experience when they're taking this substance. So now when I'm going to be taking it, when I'm doing the diet, I'm not taking like huge doses of it where I'm going to be disoriented all the time. Apparently, like I'm going to be under the supervision of somebody who's been doing this for many, many years. And so I'll be in safe hands, but I don't think I'll be, stripping naked and like running into the Amazon and, catching animals and chewing them up with my bare teeth or anything like that. But I do think there will be like a little bit of confusion. But then again, I'm laying out expectations that I might as well not have, because it's probably not going to be anything that I'm thinking or what the reality of it's going to be is probably not going to be the way it plays itself out.
Bryce, this is so fascinating. Everything you're saying is just blowing my mind right now. I never thought of the world in the dimensions in the way that you just described them. So I do want to go deeper into the Shipibo philosophies and some of these things that you're learning. But first, I want to find out what have your other experiences been like doing dietas with these plants, and what are the other plants that you've done? I thought that you had already done Datura, but I guess that's something you will do, and we'll have to circle back eventually and get that story as well. But right now, you have worked with which plants, and what were those experiences like?
Okay, well, I mean, let's see. There's quite a number of them. There's a various amount of plants within the Amazon basin, and even outside of that, grow outside of there, that are considered master plant teachers. And these are the ones that people diet in order to gain healing properties and gain certain understandings of the roots of illnesses through working with these plants. So I mean, I could run through all of them, but I think there's about what am I on right now? It's either 14 or 15, but I can try running off a few. So like the first one is tobacco. Tobacco is probably the first plant medicine that was ever discovered. It's used a lot in ceremonies. It's used in various, obviously it's used in cigarettes, but what is used in the cigarettes in the West and other parts in the world with chemical additives and everything like that is a completely bastardized version of what the spirit of tobacco is used for. And a lot of the time it's used for grounding, centering, and coming into the present moment. So if you're doing rapé, for example, which is like a tobacco snuff, and you use a little applicator and blow it up your nose, it's quite strong and quite painful. I find it very useful for meditation because it seems to really work on the root chakra, to really like ground you into the present moment, to center yourself into being as it currently stands. So there is one. There's another one called Ayahuasca, which is a vine. It's a medicine that just seems to clean you out. I probably won't go too deep into all of the descriptions of all of these plants and stuff, because obviously there's a long history or a long list of properties with all of them. But
I'm so interested though. Like I'm so interested about all these plants, and because each of them to me look like a portal to another experience. So I just want to know about all the doorways that are available to.
Yeah. Well, the plants are very intelligent beings. We are actually, in some ways, here's one thing that the plants have seemed to have taught me. Now, I don't know if I'm making this up in my head, but when the communication was going on, it felt very, sometimes it's hard to distinguish whether these are your thoughts or whether, because like when the plants communicate with you, it's very subtle. So you'll start noticing that there's almost like another presence in your being. And that's where like the alterations of thought seem to occur. So basically what the plants, the main teachings that the plants have imbued on me is that we are the plants. We are manifestations of their striving to be something more. And I think, and what I mean by that is like, we have a very symbiotic relationship with these beings. We, without them, we couldn't survive because they produce the oxygen that we breathe. And so in a lot of ways, we are their children. And, early on in our evolutionary history, where we were more ape-like creatures that seem to like live inside of the trees. There's certainly like there isn't any other biology in terms of animals that could survive without there being plants. So I think we were almost like an experiment, perhaps in conjunction with panspermia or something like that. It probably wasn't just the plants. This is probably like a multivariable analysis, if you want to call it that. But I think the plants are our parents, essentially. And one of the reasons that we're so compelled to, go to space, for example, is because I think they're conscious of the fact that the sun is actually going to explode. I think that they are wise enough to know that they need to get on this project now. And that is why, the evolution that has happened over the course of billions of years has taken so long, because they know how long the process takes. And they ultimately want to go to other star systems, to other planets, because we want to, because we are extensions of them. And I think in a lot of ways, we are actually striving to emulate them because of our addiction to convenience, our addiction to wanting to make the world quote unquote better and more easy and stuff like that. We're essentially trying to, with chairs that can, there's been times where I sleep like a tree because you don't need to do anything. We obviously are creatures that are dependent on nutrition, and we can't absorb sunlight like them. But I think, the further that we invest in technologies that make our lives easier, we're actually trying to be more like the trees, because what the trees represent are just pure essence of being. They're not trying to do anything. They're just being, absorbing food, continuing to live. And that seems to be what most of us want inside of this life. And so that seems to be the message that time and time again recurs inside of the quote unquote communication between myself and the plants. But it could be just my take on it. I'm not saying all of this is written in stone. I'm not saying any of this is, concrete. I'm not going to go write a Bible about how the plants are going to, how we're trying to be the plants and we are the plants. It's just, at this point in my shamanic evolution, that's just where I stand. And I'm probably biased because I'm working with the plants so much. So there's that. It's just food for thought, and it's fun conversation.
It's absolutely fascinating, Bryce. I haven't had this type of sensation and mind-opening discussion. Probably for like the exact nature of what you're saying is expanding my mind in a very specific way, and I don't even know how to describe that way, but I find it really exciting, and I find it really profound simultaneously, where there's something in what you said that really clicks true for me. And I don't know whether it's literally what you're saying or some archetype, but one thing I wanted to add to that was that it might sound ridiculous that a tree is trying to communicate to you, but when you think about it from a more high perspective, and you understand that trees aren't like a single entity, they are like a neural network in and of themselves. Like there's all these trees that can communicate with each other, and when one tree gets struck by lightning, all the other trees around it start adapting because they all have that information. Like, you're
Precisely.
not dealing with a tree, you're dealing with a giant, massive neural network that's manifesting itself in this dimension as a forest.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely, man. It really goes in. There's a way that I want to take this conversation to with regards to ideology and ways that we see the world, because now I love watching vegan documentaries. I myself am not vegan. I love meat. I love chicken. I love beef. I've cut out pork recently, well, for the last few years. But there's things where I notice people are talking about with the vegan argument, for example. I'm not against veganism at all. I think if you feel better for it, I think if you feel like you're doing good, ultimately all of us live inside of a delusion, but the degree to which the delusion makes your life better and the lives better for other people, like we're all going to die. So you can think whatever you want. I don't think there is a right, and I don't think there's a wrong. I don't think there's one way to live. But just going back to the veganism thing, sometimes, when the reason is something like, I don't want to hurt the animals and I don't want to kill any living things, but because I have such a strong connection with the plants, and I'm like, the things you're eating are living. And not only that, they're almost like put there for that purpose, and I don't mean to pick on the vegans or anything. That applies to like a lot of other philosophies and stuff like that. And, the thing with like being involved in the shamanic path is, at least for me, is my beliefs are changing on a daily basis. I may choose to go vegan in the future, but, and I definitely don't have it all figured out, not even being 30. So I'm not really addicted to my own pathologies or anything like that. So I'm totally.
I absolutely love what you're saying. I want to emphasize something about vegans that is really, really interesting, because again, in the first conversation that I had today, it started off about vegans as well. It's just the mirroring in these two conversations. Interesting. I'll probably have to link one to the other, just so that anybody who's listening can appreciate the synchronicity if they so choose. But what ayahuasca told me in one of my first ayahuasca ceremonies was that eating food is sex. Like, it's not different. Yes. It's two becoming one. It's this union. So when I am eating an animal or a plant, I am bringing them into my consciousness. So I am empowering them to some extent, and they are empowering me. It's a symbiotic relationship, right? Mm-hmm. And I am like when you're talking about how the plants are talking to you, like I can't stress enough to everybody who's listening that most of your thoughts are not your own. In fact, I would probably say none of them are. And a lot of them have to do with the plants that you're eating, the animals that you're eating, and the parasites and the bacteria that are telling you, hey, go eat more sugar or go eat more of this or that. And you think it's your cravings, but it's not. And you think these are your thoughts, but they're not. So it's just, we need to deconstruct this creature that we think we are, and deconstruct even what something like eating is, because it really is more of a sexual union with a plant or an animal.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely, man. We're forever involved in this like whole process of recycling, because we're obviously a part of the natural world. We have this what would you call it, this aversion to acknowledge that we are always taking stuff in, like oxygen. I've been breathing, I don't know about you, but I've been breathing through the entire conversation. That air is coming in and it's becoming carbon dioxide, which feeds the plants. And then you also eat the plants, you eat the animals that are being provided in some fashion by the plants. And then when you die, which, I mean, the technologies that we're coming up with now in terms of like anti-aging, being able to, like, we have more people than ever who are living to be centurions. And maybe there's a stage where we'll even become immortal, but that's probably not going to happen for a while. And so most of the people who are born inside of this generation at the latest will probably experience death. And your body, unless you pull an Elon Musk and fire the body off into the cosmos, into space, you're probably going to go back into the earth, where you are going to become the plants, where you're going to become the soil, you're going to feed the animals. There's a constant, it's the circle of life, just to quote the Lion King. Oh, Simba, it's the great circle of life. I don't think they actually meant to put that in there, but there's a great deal of truth within that movie, and not just because of the archetypal references. It's yeah. Anyway,
Bryce, we have to go back to the plants. So you started listing off about sacred tobacco and about how sacred tobacco is useful for grounding, and I've done hape. I know what it's like. I at one point I was doing it like 6 or 7 times a day, which is not the way you should do it. but I took a long break from it because I was overusing it. So I certainly understand how beautiful pure tobacco is. But tell me about some of these other plants. You said there's like 15 of them. I'd love to know about them all.
Oh yeah, those are just the ones that I've done. There's hundreds of them.
Yeah, the
Yeah.
ones you've done. I want to know.
Hmm.
What I would like to know, Bryce, is in like maybe like 2 or 3 minutes per plant, what the plant's name is and what your experience with it was like and what it taught you. And
Okay.
if any of them are so good that you need to spend more time on them, go ahead.
Hmm. Okay. Well, by far the most profound. If you ever start researching dietas and ayahuasca together, you're going to see the plant Noya Rao come up quite a bit, which is known as the flying tree or palo volador, which means flying tree in Spanish. Um, this this tree in the Shipibo tradition is held second only to God. It is considered a deity, and it is actually, there's a lot of stories around it. One of the stories was that there was a fisherman who noticed that some fish were nibbling the roots of this one. He noticed that a bunch of birds were coming out of the water, and so around this one tree. So he rowed his canoe and his boat a little closer to the tree, and he saw that these fish were coming and nibbling at the roots and then flying out of the water. And so he got a little closer to where he noticed them coming out, and he noticed that there was fish that were nibbling on the roots of this tree, and then they would shoot up and out of the water like they had grown wings. So he got curious and started doing a dieta with this tree, and this is where he experienced flight for the first time. Now, whether that means spiritual, whether that means physical, is anybody's guess. But this Noya Rao tree is considered a very prolific deity within the Shipibo tradition. And here's why. It is absolutely, it is, the reason I'm talking about it at first is because this is where my first really profound experience came with dieting the plants, where I understood the divinity that lives within this tree and the teachings of love, of light, of flight, of forgiveness, of compassion, and all of these very positive qualities. I had an idea, a very intellectualized ideal of what these things actually meant. And these seemed to, the teaching of the tree really made it make sense in a way that you could understand it from a spiritual perspective. It wasn't just about knowing it anymore. It was all about understanding it, understanding that, there is an intelligence in nature, ergo you are nature. So there's an intelligence in you. The same intelligence that's in you is in the trees, in the rest of the world, the rest of the universe. And I remember one interaction that I had with it, whereby after I had initially made a connection with it inside of an ayahuasca ceremony, but at the time I was over at the other center, and when you're running an ayahuasca center it's something I don't recommend to anybody. The stress can really take a toll on you. And while I was doing a dieta with this tree and trying to, talk to people who are interested in coming, running through the medical protocols and stuff. Are you taking any antidepressants that are contraindicated with the ayahuasca? Are you doing all the proper protocols so that we can make sure that if you're in our care that nothing bad is going to happen, that kind of thing. And then organizing, paying some of the workers and all that stuff. There's a lot of overhead that was happening along with the dieta, and I was getting very stressed out. And during one of the ceremonies, I was trying to connect a little bit more with the Noya Rao, and it looked at me and it just said, you need to change everything that's in your brain because it's too full of shit, and I'm trying to teach you some things and you're just not open to it. So you go ahead and take the night off. So it was the first time that I've experienced rejection from a tree, let alone the biggest one inside of the tradition. The following, and so I was like, okay, so what do I need to do then? It goes, you're not treating me with the respect that I deserve. That, you seem to think this is a game. You're just doing this alongside with everything else. It's like, I should be the primary focus if you really know what I'm all about. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to set aside a few hours a day to meditate, to try and connect with me. And then I'll share some information with you. And I've been, all right. And then I didn't hear from it again the rest of the ceremony. So the following day, I went ahead and did what it asked. I sat with a piece of the tree, tried to connect with it. At the time, we only had 2 people who were at the center, and they can kind of like look after themselves, which, you know, that very slow. So I didn't really have to look out for them. I didn't have to check in on how they were doing or how they were feeling and all that stuff. Guarding them through the process, they were just kind of on their own. So I'm sitting with the tree, or sitting and trying to connect with, communicating with the tree. I'm like, okay, so what is it that you want to teach me and all this stuff? So I started thinking about why I was getting so stressed and all of this stuff. And the month that I was doing the diet with it, that's when the traffic was really slow, like from the day it started to the day that it ended. And so I was sitting there just kind of continuing to try and connect with the tree. But then eventually like a voice came in, and it was kind of like, what are you so stressed out about? And I was like, well, there's the finances aspect of the business. There's this part of the business, like business. He's like, yeah, but what about the real reason that you're here, which is the apprenticeship? You're trying to learn from me and all this stuff. I'm like, yeah, I know, but it's like, I'm trying to balance and everything like that. I'm new at this. And it, you know, if you were to look at me while I'm having this conversation, I'm just laying down and not really, you know, not really doing anything. But then it said, why do you think I chose the month for you to do the diet with me? And that's when I was like, what? And it's like, yeah, it's like, I'm a deity and you don't seem to be treating me like I'm worthy of being deified. So it seemed to, at least the message that I got from it was, it's actively moving things around like we're all pieces of like chess pieces on a chessboard. It's having an active role inside of how the universe operates, how it functions, and it manifests itself in the physical reality as this tree, which is extremely rare inside of the Amazon. So that was my most profound, and from there on, that's when I was like, okay, I had no idea what I was dealing with, and I was not expecting an answer like that. So from now on, ever since then, I did exactly what it was asking, and it was continuing to teach me these things called icaros, which are the songs that come from the plants. And that's where, you know, a lot of people experience the healing inside of the ayahuasca ceremonies. The Noya Rao tree specifically for my voice completely changed it. So I used to sing very, I would just say normally. I mean, that's a terrible example, but the voice register would stay in singing range. What the Noya Rao did about midway through the Dieta is I was singing and then I started to yawn, but then all of a sudden my tongue started twisting over in my mouth, and then my voice was starting to get deeper. So it turned into more of a sound that was like, and it was like the voice of the Noya Rao is starting to come through me. And that's when I was like, okay, now I have a solid connection with this. And it's a tree that I actually want to go back and visit, because the amount of knowledge that it had, that it has, is probably about, let's say it's a mile long. It's more than that, but it's a mile long. And I probably got about 10 inches out of it with the amount of time that I've dieted it. So it just seems to have a never-ending wealth of information that seems to be flowing from it. And it's very beneficial for learning how to become a curandero. Yeah.
This is blowing my mind, Bryce.
Yeah.
Yeah. I've just never imagined what it's like to have a conversation with a tree, let alone to think of it and to experience it as a deity and to experience it as this grand consciousness. And I guess there's a part of my mind that is aware that it's part of this grand neural network, like I was saying before, and I'm aware that it's connected to Gaia. But I mean, as are we, but it's obviously more connected because it has less stuff in its head. So I'm aware of that, but then to think of them as masters and to think of them as having influence over our society, I'm finding that really, it's a really special way to think of it. And in some ways it's comforting, because I can just see that us monkeys are kind of fucking it up sometimes. So it's nice to see that there's other great intelligences that are at work here that make our individual intellects and even our intellect seem somewhat small.
Yeah, but keep in mind, it is just a perspective. I'm not saying it is the truth, or I'm just elaborating on my experience with it.
Mm-hmm.
It is something that I believe, and I do believe that a lot of the plants are gods that are embodied here on the planet, as well as us. That we're all kind of like God together, but there's different parts that we're unaware of, and so we're like rediscovering that constantly. One of the ways is interacting with the natural world, where God resides, for lack of a better word. Yeah.
I need to understand this more. I need to have a more visceral experience of this. But there's a part of me, just through my empathy with your story, is able to already shift some neural pathways in my head to appreciate it more. And I know that there is a common First Nations perspective of looking at lakes and mountains as grandfathers and ancestors and grandmothers, so and obviously the trees and the plants as well. So these parts of my brain that are opening, where I'm just thinking like, oh, maybe even the plants are an extension of the sea itself. And there's so much happening in my head right now. It's really interesting.
Yeah.
Do you want to go
through? Well, as they say, everything is connected.
Yeah, everything's connected. Do you want to go through some of the other plants as well? I'd be interested in hearing about all of them, if that's okay.
Yeah, I do my best with what I can remember, because there's so many experiences, and I've tried logging them, because I do want to write a book in the future about other people who prospectively want to pursue the path that I'm doing, if I can provide any sort of guidance or any sort of helpful assistance to anybody, because I think this is a path that's going to be extremely, well, not necessarily the path, but the modality of healing is going to come in very handy for those of us who actually want like a healthy society. I kind of think that there's parts of the medical system that actually want people to be sick, because that way the economy does better. But that's an entirely separate conversation. I won't deviate too much from the topic. Anyway, so yeah, there's that one. There's another plant called Chiricsanongo, which is very good for opening the heart and experiencing joy. And there is, let's see, albaca, which is very good for healing issues with the digestive tract and healing wounds and scars that are left on the body.
What was your experience like with these plants, though? Like a short story with each, to help communicate the spirit of it to us.
Okay, let's see. Well, with the albaca, for instance, I learned how to take parts of the plant and turn it into what's called the chicapa. And the chicapa is like an instrument that is kind of used inside of ceremony sometimes. It's like rattling. So you take a bunch of this, a little bit of this bush, and you start shaking it. And sometimes what it taught me to do was how to alleviate stomach cramps and issues that were happening in people's guts. So I would take this plant, and intuitively it would tell me to take it, start beating it around the stomach of the person, and then start to chant an ikaro as it comes in. And most of the time it seems to work. I've done it with women who are having periods, people who are having headaches, people who are having like very uncomfortable experiences with the ayahuasca during ceremony, and even sometimes outside of ceremony. And it doesn't work every time, but a lot of the times I would say about 80% of the time I do it, the pain just goes away. And so I'm shaking it, singing, or whatever it seems to be telling me to do. And that's how my relationship with albaca had come to be. There was another, let's see, the Pinyon Colorado is a very well-known plant and very common over here. It's also used to, medicinally, it's used to treat the various amount of pains like chronic back pain, things like migraines, things inside the body, and the uses of it. If you're training with it for Kura and Turismo, that diet will give you the ability to prescribe. After about a 3-month diet with it, you'll be able to prescribe appropriate diets for people. It'll teach you to have the intuition to be able to provide specifically what plants the people need for their type of healing. So I've done, let's see, yeah, when I was doing it, the last time I had done it, it was with my girlfriend, and we had experienced spaceships in ceremony, like as if they were right over the Maloka, which is the healing space. So much to the point where we were both seeing them at the same time, hearing the engine, feeling the vibrations of the propulsion systems. And when I experienced it, I thought I was just having tremors, because having tremors on ayahuasca is a very common feature of the medicine, because it messes with the serotonergic circuitry, and sometimes you can have little muscle spasms, and it's totally normal, totally safe. So at first I thought I was just having one of these tremors, but then I started hearing a motor, and it was right above the space. And my girlfriend went, "Do you hear that?" in the middle of the ceremony. And I went, "Yeah." And there was a huge rectangular ship that was outside of the Maloka. Now, keep in mind, like, we were on the medicine. We are on what some people would call a hallucinogen. But we were both seeing the same thing at the same time. And we were both kind of open-jawed about the whole experience. And then I think it was like the following day or the day after that, we were just moseying around. We had a day off from the ceremony, so we weren't drinking the medicine. And we were just about to go to bed. And I was standing in the Maloka, just kind of cleaning some things up. And then there was a very familiar noise that started coming, and it was a very low hum. And from a distance, it kind of sounded like a boat or something, because where we are, those things are very common. But then the humming got louder and louder and louder. And Carol, or my girlfriend, came out. She's like, "Do you hear that?" I was like, "Yeah." And so we were both standing together, and there was like something in the sky that seemed to be coming closer and closer and closer towards us, that was hovering right above the tree line. We couldn't really make out the shape or anything, because it was pitch black. It was very dark. And so this thing was hovering above the tree line, and we're like, "That's not a boat. That's not a plane. That's not anything that we've ever seen before. It looks a lot like what we saw in the space that night." And then as we were gazing at it and just kind of like marveling, like, "Oh my God, is this actually happening?" There was another one that came from about, say that ship was coming from the north. There was another one that came from the east, so from the other direction. And it seemed to be like two of them that were hovering around, like the center that we experienced this at. There was a giant circle where all the trees were burned down, and they were like hovering around the center where the tree line was, which was very peculiar and quite. It's still hard for me to believe. Now, whether they were actually, I talked with my teacher about it afterwards. His contention was that these were spirits from the plants that were coming in the form of embodied extraterrestrial entities. So there's a whole lot of convoluted information and philosophies that come in with this practice, because you start opening these doors that, where things that are just impossible seem to happen. And to explain it with any logical consistency is something that I'm still struggling with, because again, like, sometimes with the experience there is no words. But when we were seeing those things, we weren't even on ayahuasca. So that kind of that experience in itself really made me question the reality in which I live.
And you both experienced it.
Yep, simultaneously. Yeah. And it's one of those, now I am one of those dudes who says, "I saw the aliens and they fucking blah, blah, blah." But and now next thing you know, I'm going to be on that show where the guy who's got the crazy hair is going, "Aliens." And
No, honestly, Bryce, aliens are very mainstream right now. They're really, really picking up in our collective consciousness, and it seems like the governments are gonna do something involving aliens, probably to create fear around them. I guess governments tend to do this type of thing, but the aliens are. I mean, they obviously are advanced in their technologies. Um, like I don't actually know anything, but everything that I'm seeing and hearing is that they seem to be having technologies that we don't have, and we're still alive, and they're helping in many situations. So I would assume that these are benevolent entities that are helping us to some extent. And I would also assume that that they exist probably just on the edge of our visible spectrum. This would be a guess that I have, so that you could only see them if you start to open your visible spectrum to be able to see things like auras, to be able to see things like spirits and these types of very subtle entities and very subtle forms. And once you can experience those, which ayahuasca and having your pineal gland open and your third eye, your pituitary gland open, when you have these unlocked, it's much easier to sense and see them. So that's my thinking.
Yeah, no, and you're right on the money with that, man, because the more that I work with the medicine, I think we don't have five senses. I think we have a lot more than that. And I think within, like, if we're going to talk, I'm not going to make the assumption that there are or aren't aliens. I'm just going to say I don't know. But it makes sense to me that, there are things outside of our immediate realm of perception that, for example, like dogs have, even though they have the sense of smell, they can smell things that we can't. By the same token, because we can't actively look into the mind of a dog or a cat or other animals, cats can probably see things that we can't either. And, and taking sight and all the five senses out of account, it's like, what other senses do other animals possibly have that we're just not aware of because we don't have the actual capability of being able to measure them? And that's one of the problems with, having like a materialistic, reductionist worldview in terms of science. We think A plus B equals C, but we're not taking into account all the variables that we're not aware of in terms of measuring them. And, I certainly have faith in science in some aspects, right? It allows us to understand our reality, and it gives us a great deal of control over our environment, but I don't think it's the ultimate answer. I don't think it can be, because you have to take all variables into account. The very scientific philosophy that we choose to follow is one that we actually cannot follow because we are limited creatures.
Yeah. Well said. Well said, Bryce. When we look at the visible spectrum, we can see such a tiny fraction. So it's so easy. We're barely scratching the surface of what exists.
Yeah. I think if the aliens, sorry, go ahead.
No, you go. You're talking about aliens.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say, if the aliens do exist, they're probably frequencies. They're probably not, or something like frequencies that seem to exist within, like, they're probably around us right now. I mean,
I can imagine them saying the same thing about us. Like, if humans exist, they're probably frequencies.
Yeah, they're probably. I mean, if you expand your perception of abstraction upwards, we're talking about something that's extraterrestrial, but that all that means is not from this planet. But if you go a level higher and realize that the universe is one connected entity, it's like, then everything is alien, because everything is an alien at the same time. And so if something's coming from another realm, it's just like, I don't know if you know what I'm saying, but
totally, it's
like, yeah, because everything is connected. So, they could be in the room with me right now. They could be in the room with you right now. They could be, in the room with the people who are watching this or listening to this right now. We can't detect everything, again, because from a sensory standpoint, we can't be aware of everything. And even if we were, that would kind of make life a little bit mundane. What's the point of playing the video game on easy mode all the time. You want a little bit of challenge. You want a little bit of handicap to actually like have a story, have like an interesting series of events to tell your friends if you want to inspire them or if you want to get them motivated or anything like that. But that's going. I'm going off into a whole other direction again.
No, you're free to, man. Look, I am so interested in all of these directions, but I'm still most interested in your plant stories because it's the furthest thing from my reality. So if you have more stories about what plants do and what your experiences in communication with them are like, that's blowing my mind.
Okay. Well, the last one I'll share is the most recent one I did, which was with the Shiwawako, which is another tree that's held very highly up in the Shipibo tradition. It's one of the tallest trees in the Amazon, and they use the wood a lot for decks and floors and all that stuff, which is really unfortunate because the things that it has to teach are, the free air now. It has a lot to teach us about stability and harmony, and it's a tree that you die for protection within the realm of curanderismo. Medicinally, it has some other functions for improving your respiratory system and actually for impotence. So if you're having trouble, well, I mean, like I need to explain what that means. Anyway, now I was doing it for the curanderismo purposes, just so you know. And there were some things that it was teaching me, and then I wanted to share it with people, but then it said, the thing with the finger over the mouth, it said, hey, this is for you only, so please do not share this with anybody, because this is how we are going to stamp that we are in a relationship together, and that I will continue to teach you after the Dieta is over, but you need to adhere to this, because this is going to be one of the ways that I test you. If you tell somebody, I'm not going to work with you anymore. So there's things that I've learned from it. Exactly. Yeah. So, but I'm just saying what it said, not what it was teaching me. So there's things that, and then once your relationships start deepening with these plants, or I would argue entities, there's going to be, like any relationship. With a girlfriend, you have to maintain the communication. You have promises that you're going to keep to each other. And you have to do that with the trees as well, because you realize that they are living, breathing creatures that, they have emotions. They have, what we categorize as emotions, what they have is something, I don't even know if there's a word for it in the English language, but they're similar and they're very dissimilar to us. They have knowledge that when they pass it to you, you can't explain it. And so, conceptually, you just try to work with it in order to help other people experience it as well. And, it's almost like, I feel like I'm dancing around the subject of, I can't explain what I'm doing. I just know that it's helping people. And I know that people seem to be reaping some sort of benefit from it, whether it's building more confidence, alleviating depression, helping with certain physical disorders and mental disorders and things of that nature. And, maybe the ayahuasca isn't exactly, and the other plants are the only things to credit for it, because it is possible that these plants are just unlocking certain channels that were already dormant within you, which is another argument I would make as to what they actually do. They just show you what is there within yourself and within your environment. So either one, like I'm not really married to one or the other. Maybe it's both, maybe it's like all of the above.
Yeah. It's A, B, both A and B, and then neither.
Exactly.
Let's say if we've learned anything from the double slit experiment. Yeah, that's absolutely fascinating, Bryce. Just the idea that you have to keep a secret with a plant, like it's trusting you with information that you are not allowed to share with other people. I can't even imagine. Well, I guess I can imagine it now, but I never would have imagined that before. That was a possibility. I'm starting to get these thoughts in my head of like, man, there's so many plants around me and they all apparently give you some superpower. So there's a part of me that's just thinking, wow, I could just at any point just diet some of these plants. And, I certainly plan on doing that in the future. I don't know, I don't know when or which plant, but I'm creating stability in my life right now. And once I've created a sense of stability and I can do these types of excursions, I'm certainly going to do them because I think it's just, that sounds fun.
I'd be happy to be there while you do it, man.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But I'm interested specifically in doing ones near where I live because then I wouldn't be hamstrung about needing to always go to Peru or something.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. It's a totally legitimate concern too. I don't think that, just because the plants grow in the Amazon, that they're any more powerful than the plants that probably grow native to Canada, like where we're from.
Actually, you could make the argument that they are because of the temperature difference.
It could be, yeah. I mean, I'm still very new in this work, so what one of my goals with this is to be able to, like, what I'm apprenticing right now, so it's kind of like being in university. I'm trying to learn the modality of how to connect with the plants on a regular basis and through methods that are fairly reliable. And I want to take the modality eventually and move it over to the western part of the world. So maybe come back to Canada and then do some exploration with, for instance, oak or, pine trees or, those California redwoods based on their age. Those things probably got some deep ass wisdom. And so I want to go ahead and start, digging into that pile of cookies and see what kind of flavors they got,
Wow, that's blowing my mind. I'm just thinking about it. Like it feels like once you understand the archetype of how to connect with these plants, I mean, you could probably also do something similar with animals. I imagine. I don't know if you have to kill them to do it or how it would work, or maybe just hang out with them alone. I don't know, but I imagine. Like I've seen a cat on LSD, and oh my god, the thing was super intelligent when I saw it on LSD.
Really?
Oh yeah, it came right in front of my face and looked me in the eyes like an inch away from my face. Like I've never seen a cat do that when I was not on LSD. But it did it.
Oh, okay. You were on LSD. Not
I was. The cat wasn't. No, the cat's just being a cat, and they're already psychic. Yeah. but it was. I was on LSD, and it was like really communicating with me just with the eyes. So, anyways, all this to say is, I'm so excited about the archetype of learning how to connect with different plants and animals and really just other life forms around us outside of just the daily way that we interact with all these living creatures. So, and I wonder if you could do it with rocks, like crystals. Like you could eat gold or amethyst, or I don't know. Like my mind's just spinning with all the possibilities.
Well, they say that you can diet anything. If you want to understand the spirit of money, you can diet some money. You can diet, man, like literally anything. Apparently. It depends on who you talk to. Pardon me?
Wouldn't money just be paper though, or a metal?
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm just kind of elaborating on the philosophies of other people, so I'm not sure whether that. Now, I personally don't feel the draw to it. I'm a little bit more prone to leaning towards the things that I'm attracted to. And
yeah,
I'm
me
not
too.
really. Yeah,
but I wouldn't diet money.
The options are there, and you can I was actually talking with one of my other masters, and or one of my other teachers, and he was saying that if you diet rocks, a lot of the time that is for protection in the spiritual realm when you're helping other people with the work. So if you diet something like quartz or what's the other one, like malachite or something like that, those are supposed to help with preventing the intrusions when you're doing the extractions on other people from entering you, because you do want to take the precautions of actually guarding yourself when dealing with people who have like the energies inside of them that are the equivalent of like demonic entities sometimes. Yeah, some of these can be quite scary. I had an exorcism that I had done in Wachuma. That is an experience that I would not care to repeat, and although I walked away from it rather unscathed, I was very much, I wish I was a little bit better prepared, because the experience itself was actually quite almost traumatic. But
are you able to share any of that, or is that too tense or tender?
Oh, that's a very long story. we could save that for another pod. I mean, that's going to take me at least a half an hour to tell, and I think we're almost
Okay.
3 hours into the podcast. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Oh
I'd be
man.
happy to share it though. But it takes a very long time to say, because maybe I should correct what I'm saying with that. So when I was doing it, it wasn't actually me doing it, because sometimes when you diet these plants for long enough, you get what are called like protector spirits. And these are agents of the plant kingdom that actually work through you. Because when you go into ayahuasca space, and as you continue this work, you're basically just becoming a vessel. You're surrendering a lot of your identity. You're surrendering a lot of your, obviously my name is Bryce and I have a driver's license and I have a car and blah, 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 blah. But really what's happening over time is I'm melting into nothing, to the point where the other plant consciousnesses are like occupying my body. Now I need an identity to be able to function inside of the world and not sound like a total lunatic, but it's like more as time goes on, I'm becoming less and less me. but I'm actually okay with that, because they seem to know best. So I trust them fully. But the first protector entity that I made, he was the one that actually did the extraction. I was just the vehicle through which it traveled, or the vehicle through which it expressed itself. So yeah, it was a terrifying experience, but it might have to happen again in the future. I'm not sure. I would choose, if I could elect it not to, I would choose that option though, because it was pretty frightening.
Yeah, I would. I like how you're saying it though, because you're always keeping that relaxed approach to it, where you're always a willing vessel for consciousness to work through, which I think is
Mm-hmm.
really special. And the fact, it might happen where next time you do it, despite how traumatizing it is now, it might actually be just like a piece of cake next time, because your consciousness is in a different state. So who knows?
Yeah, it might be easier. Yeah, that's true. And like with all the experience I've acquired since then, because that was about a little over a year ago, and a lot has transformed inside of the year, especially with the progression with the apprenticeship. I feel like I would be better qualified to be able to do something like that with a little less, making a little less mess at the same time. Like the guy is okay. He's fine, who, the thing had happened to, but, again, it's just, and the thing is, like, when it happened, it was completely unexpected. And, I was the only one on anything. So he was completely sober, and he was, puking and making these very violent noises while the extraction was going on. And my girlfriend actually has a recording of the last few minutes of it happening. But she recorded it from about 100 meters away. And it's, yeah. When I listen back to it, it almost sounds like it didn't happen. But yeah. I don't know where I'm going with this, but basically in summation, it's, if you're going to be doing spiritual work with people, if you want to avoid getting hurt yourself, it's probably best to take the precautionary measures of, at least in this field, you don't have to just do the dieting and all that stuff, because that's just specific to the Shipibo tradition. You can be very, you can do very good work with Qigong, for example, which is like a derivative of Tai Chi for being able to balance the body, balance the mind, balance the soul. There's other things like Reiki, which actually like help strengthen your vibration if you practice it often. And it's just a method. That's all it is. It's kind of like criticizing, the way that Western medicine works. It's like, if you break your arm, go to a doctor, have them put a splint on your arm. That seems to be the surest way to improve it. But if you have some sort of psychological problem that you can't seem to get to the root of the issue with, and throwing antidepressants at it isn't helping, then that's where like something like ayahuasca and the other medicines that we've been discussing in this conversation seem to flower some amazing results.
Bryce, if people want to connect with the Ayahuasca Healing Center, I'm sorry, I keep forgetting it. Is it the Ayahuasca Healing Center?
Yeah, Ayahuasca Spirit Center.
Ayahuasca Spirit Center. If people want to connect with the Ayahuasca Spirit Center and they want to try some of these sacred medicines, especially the three that you mentioned at the beginning, how would you recommend they go about doing that?
Well, the first thing would be to go on the site, and you can go ahead and book some time if you want. So it's Ayahuasca Spirit Center. So ayahuasca spelled Ayahuasca, Spirit, Spirit, Center, CENTER.com. And then from there, you can book some time to come down and visit. This is just one of many locations. There's a lot of other very good and reputable centers that you can trust in the staff, you can trust in the shamans. They're quite reliable. I would advise you to just use your intuition and have some intentions when you're making plans to come down and try something like this. I have a feeling in the future, especially with how the legislation is changing, especially in Canada with the legalization of cannabis and the legalization of using ayahuasca as a religious sacrament within the city of Montreal, that probably in the near future, it will be legal to be able to do it locally. So, but if you're getting a little impatient or you want to, take the dive now, that is the center that I work at. And I have, I feel very lucky to be of service at a place like that with shamans who I deeply respect, who I deeply love, who I would trust with my life. The staff there are very reliable. They're very trustworthy. And I guarantee if you go there, you'll be looked after.
I mean, that's all you can ask for. You can't ask for a better combo than everything you just described. I'll certainly keep that in mind if I'm going down to Peru. Now, thank you so much for coming on this show, Bryce. It's such a pleasure to have you on Behind the Grid. Before we go, is there any final words you want to share? Is there any final messages from your heart that you want to share with the audience today?
I guess the biggest thing is don't ever give up on your dreams. Don't let anything stand in your way of your happiness, because you have a right to it. Now, be cautious with how happy you make yourself, because you want to have a balance of emotions, because too much happiness can lead to impulsive mistakes. But if you're experiencing something that's low vibrational, anger, sadness, depression, anything like that, just remember that it's going to pass. And by the same token, if you're feeling overly happy, just remember that it's going to pass. Keep yourself centered, neutral. Enjoy the happy times when they come around, but also try to be aware of the ramifications of certain emotional states, and try to be grateful for this amazing experience that we all seem to be sharing. Isn't it a miracle? And that's about all I have for right now.
Bryce, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's been such a pleasure.